Hello, everybody. It's so great to see everyone's names today. This is Linda Gargan, and I am watching in the chat box and see so many old friends. It's great to see you here. We are about 1,000 strong on this webinar this afternoon. So it's wonderful to know that we are able to provide something that's important and that you believe is helpful. I'm watching the chat box, as I'm sure you are, and we've got folks from Hawaii to Alaska to Puerto Rico with us today. And thanks to everyone in between, thank you for being with us. I'm going to take just a minute to introduce Sue, and every time I get to introduce her, it's such a pleasure because she is such a delight. Sue Beddoe is with us today, and as most of you know, she is an amazing, powerful advocate for our parents, our caregivers, our families, and our children. Now, if you don't know this, Sue is the mother of 22 children. That's right, 22. 2 are by birth, and 20 are adopted. 3 of these children, unfortunately, are now deceased as they had terminal illnesses. But she and her husband, Hector, have served as foster parents for more than 50 children in 3 states, and as a host family for refugee youth from Sudan, Kosovo, and Guatemala. And the Beddoe family children come from many ethnicities and personal backgrounds. Some were adopted at birth. Others were teenagers when they joined the family. Some are from the United States. Others are from countries around the world. Some have mental, physical, intellectual, or emotional challenges. Now, Sue has worked in this field for over 33 years. She's worked in adoption, foster care, juvenile justice, you name it, she's worked there. She writes and speaks extensively. She is an amazing keynote. If you were at a conference last year, you heard her there. And she is involved in community efforts on behalf of families and children at many levels. She is a wonderful person to have with us this afternoon, talking with us about self-care. All of us are so involved in supporting families. Sue wants to spend some time talking with you about self-care strategies and taking care of yourself. So Sue, I'm going to turn this over to you. Welcome so much, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Linda. I am so excited to be here with all of you. It just feels like a big hug from all around the country and even the world. So it's really great to be here and to be part of this. I do have my video on right now, so if you've got it set on your computer where you can see the person speaking, you can see me for a moment. I wanted you to know that I'm really here. I'm really in real life doing this. But then I'm going to turn off my, stop my video from running because sometimes it puts too much overload on the internet, and I want to make sure you can see the presentation. So I did want to pop my head in and say hello, but I will stop that part now. But hopefully you can still hear my voice and see the slides that I'm sharing with you. So as was mentioned at the beginning and in the chat box, please do use that chat box. I'm so glad so many of you are finding it. You're introducing yourselves, you're saying where you're from. If you have questions or comments, that's the place to put them. Try not to use any of the other types of boxes that Zoom makes available for that, because there's so many of us, it's too hard to keep track of multiple places where people might be posting. It's possible I might pause along the way if I see a question that's relevant and interject a response, or if I see a comment, make note of it. And I will also try my best to leave some time at the end for responding to some of those questions as well. So again, thank you for being with us, and we're just going to jump right in because it's not that long of an amount of time we have, and I do have some things to share with you that I hope you will find useful. And I'm going to start by sharing a little cartoon. So as you look at this cartoon, perhaps you resonate with it a little bit. In fact, in our world in our life and working in mental health and human services, support services, peer-to-peer family supports, we probably can relate to this all the time, whether we're in a global pandemic or not. This is just something our life tends to have characteristically, some stress in the day, some stress at night. But in recent times, of course, there's been even more so of that. And with that in mind, I wanted to start with this just saying, you know, we are all in this together, we can resonate, we can relate, but also it is in the form of our cartoon. And that's intentional, that I wanted to start off with something light that I was hopeful would make you smile or maybe even chuckle. Because of all the self-care strategies and tips that I will sort of share as we go along in our time together, I really want you to remember that as hard and challenging as things seem to be right now across the globe and in our communities and in our homes and families even, we have to be able to find those moments we can pause, we can reflect, we can even smile, we can even laugh, we can even still have a little joy. So whether it's a cartoon like this, whether it's a meme that you see on social media, whether it's something your cat did, or anything else, just find those moments that you can laugh and smile each day, and not only take note of them, but share them with one another. But I would like to say that the other piece of what I wanted to kind of get us started thinking about is this idea of what I call the power of one. And what do I mean by that? And it's really going to guide and frame a lot of what I'm going to share with you in the remaining time together, as it does relate to this topic of self-care. The numbers that are floating around right now, every time you turn on the news or social media or anything, there's numbers and numbers and numbers, big numbers, scary numbers, changing numbers, uncertain numbers. And so I want to encourage you to take a step back, not allow all those numbers to overwhelm you, and each day to try to focus on one thing at a time. And I love to use this photo to remind us of that, because this is a photo that someone took while hiking. And because the tree canopy over this particular hiking route is so dense, we can't even really tell if it was taken during the day or at night. We just know it's dark there. And the only light there is the light of the hiker's own flashlight or headlamp. But what we do know is that although that hiker can't see the whole rest of the trail, and that hiker can't see the summit or the beautiful spot where there's going to be a vista and a view, that hiker has enough light for one next step. And that's really what I encourage you to think about in our time together today. I'm going to be using that as a way of framing what I want to talk with you about. I have a set of questions that I'm going to share with you, and they will be provided, or they are provided as a handout you will be able to receive. And I'm going to outline that maybe these questions, a couple of them you ask yourself each morning, a few at lunchtime, a few later in the day. You'll see as we go along how I structure that. But these questions can help guide and frame our self-care in a time such as this. Because you may have other self-care routines that you typically would do, and maybe you're struggling or finding them hard to do now. So that could be a possibility. And maybe you usually like to go out to the gym, or you go and meet someone for coffee once a week. And some of the things that you like to do, someone said their slide is on the fourth picture. That's correct. That's where it should be. Some of the things you like to do might not be possible at a time such as this. Or even if you're home and the things you normally do are possible, but you somehow don't feel the energy or the space to do them, I'm going to provide you as we go through today with a set of questions and encourage you to just ask yourself those questions throughout the day. And each question is guided by the number one thing to focus on at a time. So let's start with question 1, which I would encourage you and invite you to think about every day in the morning. Just start your day by thinking, what is one goal I have for today? Not what is my whole to-do list, not what is everything that I didn't finish yesterday that now I'm stuck with having to worry about today. There'll be time for that. You will have to look at your to-do list at various times, but try to start your day with thinking about one goal, and then as you move along, just think of one goal at a time. And just so you know, my one goal for this webinar is that each of you will take away one thing, whether it's a thought, whether it's an idea, a strategy, an activity, or even one of the images like the forest image I had a moment ago, that you'll be able to take one thing for yourself and say, that's something I could probably try. Let me give that a try. Or maybe you'll even say, oh, that's something I used to do for myself, haven't done it lately. Let me try it again. Now, and the rest of the questions, there's a whole series of them. I'm gonna weave them in and out through our time together this afternoon. But in between the various questions, I'm also going to share some other tips and strategies and things that relate to our ability to care for ourselves. So I just wanted to share here that there are some different ways that people tend to respond in times of crisis. And as you look at these 6 different ways, perhaps you'll see yourself, or some of them might resonate and say, yeah, I see myself in that. And especially for many of us that are on this call, if you are a leader, a family leader, a peer support leader, or in any kind of similar role, you might specifically see yourself in some of these thoughts and ideas as the fixer, as someone who wants to make things better, as someone who wants to help others. You might also see yourself as a fighter, someone who wants to advocate and make change. And if you see yourself in some of those kinds of roles, so I'm seeing a few people notice they have no audio. I hope the rest of you do. I hope everyone else can hear. But, and Kelsey will be working on helping those who can't. So if any of you see yourselves in those roles, a couple things to know about this list. One is that it's not mutually exclusive. So you might see yourself in more than one of these ways, and at the same time or at different times. And the people and the families you help, you may see them, or that you may recognize or acknowledge that some of their responses maybe fit into one of these capacities. So I just wanted to give this as a starting point to make us aware that there's a whole lot of different ways we ourselves or others in our lives, both at home and in work and in our networks, might be responding to the situation and the crisis at hand. Now let's look at the second question on my reflective self-care question list. And again, this one is also intended for morning. As you ask yourself, what is one goal? Also ask yourself, who is one person I can turn to for support today? And be aware that this might not be able to be your usual support person. Because everyone is sharing in this crisis, sometimes people that would normally be our supports might not be in a position where they can play that role for us. But yet it's so important for our own self-care, and then for our ability to pass that on to others we care for, to recognize, there might be this thing called social distancing, but I am not alone. Someone is my support person. Someone is in my corner. And so if it's not your usual support person, maybe it's a neighbor and you mutually agree to call and check in on each other and be each other's support person. Maybe it's a teenager in your home, or even a 9-year-old who knows how to use technology and can be your support as you try to do these virtual meetings. But find that one person that can be your support. Now I'm going to just walk us quickly, because we don't have a lot of time, through some definitions that help remind us why our self-care is so needed at a time such as this, and how the things we do know about stress, grief and loss, and trauma, and including secondary and vicarious trauma, how they're being influenced, or how our experience of those things is being influenced by the global pandemic situation that we're in, and therefore why we have to be reflective about that and aware of that and acknowledge that as we enter into this particular season of self-care. So we know that stress is defined as a pressure or tension on somebody or something, and that there's multiple types of stress. There's positive stress, which is energizing and promotes wellness and health and growth. It can be getting ready for a promotion, or getting ready for an exciting family event, or welcoming a new relationship into our life. A lot of positivity, but stress. There's tolerable stress, which not so positive, but it is a common human experience. And usually with our natural coping mechanisms and natural system of support, we can get through it. And then there's toxic stress, which also looks like trauma, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Now, loss has to do with being deprived of someone or something that we value, because it either was taken from us or has left us. And right now in this world we're in, so many of us are going through this deep sense of loss and then grief, which will come next, because it's so unanticipated. And because at the moment, at least, many of the things that we're losing, our connections, our jobs, kids' schooling, graduation dates, proms, things that seem like they're being lost feel unrecoverable. Now, in the business world, when they're developing a profit and loss statement, they that last bullet there about something being unrecoverable is one of the ways that they define that it is in fact a loss, like inventory that got burned in a fire or something. You're not going to get it back. Now, we know that some of the things we're losing in this time of this pandemic are most likely going to be recoverable, or to some extent. But right now, a lot of us are not sure of that. There's just too much uncertainty. And that's why loss is kind of morphing into grief for many of us. If you haven't yet read an article that's been circulating in this time, it just came out a few weeks ago, but it's been widely circulated, called "That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief." And it is written by Scott Baronato, and it's an interview that he did for the Harvard Business Review with David Kessler, who was part of the work with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on identifying these various stages of grief. So that discomfort you're feeling is grief. I hope you have read it or will read it, but I would just like to share one paragraph from the article where he highlights how the stages of grief might be looking in this particular moment of pandemic. When asked the question, what can individuals do to manage all this grief, he said, understanding the stages of grief is a start. But whenever I talk about the stages of grief, I have to remind people the stages are not linear and may not happen in this order. It's not a map, but it provides some scaffolding for this unknown world. So let's look at how, yes, and it is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and David Kessler who worked together on these that I'm presenting to you here. And so Kessler is now the one replying to this question about how do these stages look in this pandemic that we're in. So he just walks us through and says, there's denial. Many of us said early on, oh, this virus, it won't affect me, it won't affect us, my family, my community. There's anger. What? You're making me stay home, you're taking away my activities, I'm angry. There's bargaining. Okay, I get it. I have to do this social distancing thing for 2 weeks, for 30 days, and then everything will be better, right? There's sadness. I don't know if the bargain will work. I might do this for 2 weeks and 30 days, and it still might not end. In fact, I don't know how it will end, or when it will end, or if it will end. And then there's acceptance. Okay, it's happening. How do I proceed? What can I do? And yes, thank you to the comment about the recent podcast with Brene Brown. It's also a very excellent way to hear more of Kessler's and Brown's interaction on this topic. So I just wanted to highlight that now so you kind of can see a framing for what many of us are going through, and to remember that there's also many different kinds of grief. That what we've been, kinds of grief, here we go, that there's many different kinds of grief. And what we've been focusing on and talking about so far with those stages and everything is kind of what people think of as normal grief. And you can see that that's in quotes because everyone is different. Everyone has their own patterns of response. But it's kind of just the general word that we understand as grief. But there's lots of other kinds of grief. And if you do research on it, you'll see many, many more than just the few that I've outlined here. But I wanted to highlight these particular other types of grief because they're especially prevalent in the world today and maybe in your own life or your own family. So there's ambiguous grief or disenfranchised grief when we have a loss that is not acknowledged by others. One example that's given is maybe when you break up or when you find out that someone who was an ex or was a friend a long time ago died, and people aren't acknowledging that you're really grieving that loss, even though, it hasn't been someone in your life recently. In child welfare, it often can occur when there's someone who has had a child placed out of their home for foster care or adoption, and yet some people don't validate that that's a loss for them to grieve. And in this current world, when there's people actually dying and businesses closing, and then other people with other kinds of losses may feel that their losses are not being acknowledged. There's ambiguous grief. There's complicated or traumatic grief when grief and trauma interweave together, and we'll hit on trauma in a moment. Then these last two are in particular what I want you to be aware of, that many are facing today, and to see if you recognize it in yourself or others. Anticipatory grief, often experienced, for example, if you know someone is about to die, if you have a loved one that's been placed in hospice care, you're kind of grieving them before they're even gone. But now in this world, we're all kind of in that anticipatory state of grief, grieving the world that we don't know yet, grieving the next shoe that's going to drop, the next crisis that's going to happen. We're anticipating, and we're doing it collectively. We have this collective sense of grief that often is more confined to one area, like one community experiencing a natural disaster or one community experiencing a school shooting. But now we're all collectively around the world experiencing this grief together. Before I go on with a few more definitions, I want to get us to the third question on my list of daily reflective questions to help you with your self-care. And this is the third of the morning questions. So you had, what is the goal? One goal for today. Who is one person that can support me today? And then, who is one person I can reach out to today? Now, in your personal life and in your work life, you may have more than one person that you're responsible for reaching out to. But even if that's true, again, bring the focus down to one. Who is one at a time, one person that I can reach out to. And there's a lot of research about how doing this reaching out not only benefits that person that you might be a support to by reaching out, but it benefits you. The act of reaching out benefits you. And be very concrete as you think about that outreach you're going to do. Like, think about one question you might ask that person, one concern you might feel you want to explore with that person, one support you possibly can offer, or even one resource that you can suggest. So again, bring it to one, focus. It helps you with your self-care, and in this instance, it also helps that other person. And then if you have more than one person, you can go on and think about another person, but try to be very intentional about thinking about one person at a time. Thank you, Linda, for sharing that you've been doing that exact thing, reaching out to one specific person a day, and how that has been a great experience for you. I'm glad to hear that concrete example of this working. Now let's continue looking just at a few more of the definitions, and then we'll get into some more of the self-care strategies as well. Now, toxic stress is when stress is extreme and prolonged, and that often is equated with trauma. And we know that many of the people in our own families, our own lives on this call, as well as the families we work with and support, already had toxic stress and trauma in their life before this set of circumstances descended. And so this is like that double level of toxicity that we're facing. And that it can be everyone that can be facing that, from an individual child to an individual adult to a whole family and community to a whole network of families across generations. And it can feel like a big storm, right? And so that's why I use storm images here to sort of remind us of the different types of trauma that people are exposed to and experience. But what's really happening now is that all those different kinds of trauma storms are kind of happening all at the same time to us and everyone around us. And that's where a lot of the challenge is. And secondary trauma is what a lot of us are also experiencing. And, just a quick definition there, it's frequent or continuous exposure to other people's trauma. But I love my friend Brandy Lee, who also defines it this way: when you're thinking about the trauma, the secondary trauma you experience as a helper, that it's not the one you can't forget, it's the 100 you can't even remember. But you've been exposed to their pain and their trauma, and that creates trauma for you. And Kelsey, thanks for sharing the use of the phrase physical distancing rather than social. I was definitely going to get to that at some point, and I love that reminder that we really shouldn't be doing social distancing. We need to have that sense of social and emotional connection even while we're physically separated. Now, secondary trauma we often think of as the things on the right side of here. They kind of have a negative connotation: burnout and fatigue and stress. But I wanted to highlight also that there are strengths that can come through this. Just as there's compassion and fatigue, there can be compassion satisfaction. And just as trauma can be vicarious, resilience can be experienced vicariously too. And so there's two other definitions I want to share. Here's one of resilience. And in spite of everything that's written about resilience, particularly recently, recent years, I mean, very little still remains known about it. But what we do know is this: it's not something you're either born with or not. Resilience is something that can grow, it can be nurtured, it can be nourished, it can be strengthened. And so as we go forward in the rest of this webinar today, the things I'm going to share with you as the remaining self-care tips and those daily reflection questions are things that are designed to help grow and nourish and nurture your own resilience. Those actual brain pathways that build and lead to not only resilience, but also to post-traumatic growth. And yes, I would agree, Linda, that spiritual resources, drawing on all of our resources, physical, mental, emotional, social, spiritual, communal, are so important to resilience as well as to this post-traumatic growth, which isn't talked about as much when you go to, say, a workshop on trauma. But as you can see from the citation at the bottom of the slide, it's not a new term that just came out last week. It's been around for a while. It just doesn't always get as much attention. But at a time like this, when there is this prolonged trauma event, life crisis going on that we're sharing in communally and collectively, there's also opportunity for positive and transformative growth. And that we can get through this with a greater or deeper appreciation of life, of deeper or renewed relationships, or understanding of our relationships with others, seeing our own life and hope and optimism and possibilities, recognizing strengths that we might have that we never knew we had before, or that we maybe didn't even have before, but we've sort of developed and planted a seed and nurtured along during this time, and spiritual transformation and spiritual change. So these are all things that are possible. And maintaining even that little grain of hope, that little grain of optimism that I cannot just survive this, I cannot just get through this, but I can grow from this, is something that can help us have the desire and the motivation to put in practice these self-care activities even when it's a little tough. And having a conversation and prayer with your husband and family, great idea. And then exploring and giving resources, really a beautiful way to focus on this idea that we can have this growth and transformation. And so we do need to, if we're going to do the self-care things that help us most, we also have to be aware of our own warning signs and those of people around us, and recognize that all of this trauma, stress, loss, grief, vicarious trauma, all of that, that it in fact influences us across the board. It influences our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors. It influences how we think and analyze and understand. It affects how we feel and perceive and interpret. And it influences how we respond in our actions and behaviors. So as we develop that awareness, I'm glad someone caught the the Lost in Space little reference there. As we develop that awareness, the definitions are helpful. That's why I shared those. We have to know, what are my own warning signs that I'm getting a little, to the point where I need some support? Am I the type that gets cranky? Do I get spacey? Do I get check out? Do I get overly busy? What are my own warning signs? And then what are the signs of people around me so that I can help co-regulate them as well? My family members, colleagues or clients, even the cashier at the grocery store. You know, one of my daughters said to me the other day that one of my adult daughters, who has a lot of her own challenges with trauma and stress, said, "Oh, I went into CVS and that person that, you know, at the register was so rude to me." And we talked a little about it, and I said, "Do you think that it might be stressful for her every day to still have to go to work during this time? Do you think she might be worried that she might be getting exposed to this virus while she's out there working? Do you think maybe what you saw was some of her stress and not rudeness?" And my daughter was her own challenges, but yet she was still able to take that step back and reflect. And that pause and reflection helped her have compassion for that person, but it had helped her have a little more self-compassion as well. So as you're looking for warning signs, you know, just remember to be aware that it can impact you in all these different areas. And also, if you are still working or you are still functioning in a support role as a peer support leader or in any other way, or even in your family domain, that it can also impact your functioning on these different areas. So just be aware and maybe doing something every now and then that helps you take sort of a measure of how that is for you. So I included a handout of the protocol. This isn't a training about that. I just included it as a tool that might be able to help you sort of take that step back and say, you know, how am I doing? It's not a psychological test or a medical test. It's just a way of sort of reflecting. And if you find it useful, then go ahead and use it. But what I also want to share is that at times like these, when we're going through that anticipatory type of grief and that collective type of grief that I shared about earlier in the definitions, that lots of times it's hard to stop and really process in our brain, in our mind, in our thoughts, even in our emotions. It's sometimes hard to process, but yet it's absorbed in our body. The stress, the loss, the anxiety is absorbed in our bodies. And so we really have to be able to listen to our bodies and recognize what they're telling us and slow down long enough to do that, but also engage our bodies in the healing. So the fourth question on my list of daily questions, and the first three were recommended for that: wake up in the morning, ask yourself those first three questions. And then these next three, this one and the next two will come on the next slide. These next three are what I call my lunchtime questions. So kind of around midday, do take a lunch break, do pause, and around that time of day, take a moment for self-reflection and ask yourself, what is one way, again, back to that, just number one, just focus on one thing, one way I'll nourish and move my body today. Don't beat yourself up if you've been eating junk food, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up if you've been couch surfing more than usual, that's okay. Don't make a list of 100 different ways you're going to start a whole new fitness plan unless that's the kind of nature of you and that helps you. But if not, then let that go. But just ask yourself, what is one way that I'll make sure I stay hydrated, that I'll eat something, that I'll breathe? In fact, right now, I invite you to just pause for a second and breathe in and out. Do two more together. Breathe in and out. And one more. Breathe in and out. So take those pauses. Nourish your body, but move your body too, okay? Maybe you'll do yoga like the illustration here. Maybe you'll just take a walk. Maybe you'll turn on some fun music and dance for 5 minutes. Maybe you'll just kind of stretch and reach for the ceiling. Whatever you do, ask yourself, what's one way I'm going to nourish and move my body today? And then also at lunchtime, as you do that, ask yourself, how am I also going to nourish my spirit and my mind? And again, with one thing, one way. Not a big to-do list, but one way. And as I was preparing this, it really reminded me of that book, Eat, Love, Pray, the title. So I thought, that kind of just boils it down to the basics, right? just nourish our body, nourish our mind, nourish our spirit, just by one little thing each day. And I'm seeing some great notes. People are sending some to me privately as well as to the whole group, but drinking water, listening to music, doing a yoga routine, you know, just even taking a shower and getting dressed each morning, even if you're not going out to work, prayer. So, you know, each day around lunchtime, reflect on those questions. How am I going to nourish myself? And as you do that, you may find that the difficult feelings, the challenging emotions come to you. And as you have those challenging feelings and emotions, don't stuff them. Don't stuff them. Don't bury them. Don't squash them down. Don't deny them. I was myself listening to a great webinar recently, and the speaker was named Brian Miller, and he reminded us that when you don't hold space for the difficult feelings, stress accumulates and anxiety incubates. Brian Miller, stress accumulates and anxiety incubates. So don't do that to yourself. Hold space for those challenging feelings, but also then seek the balance that you need by the other strategies that I'm going to continue to share that bring you into a place of hope, that bring you into a place of gratitude, that pull you back from that place of despair. But give yourself the opportunity to hold space for those difficult feelings. And I'm sorry to hear about the lack of respect and support from customers and management for someone who's working every day. I appreciate you. I thank you for what you're doing. And I hope that some of these tips will be helpful to you as well. And we give you great appreciation for being out there every day. Now, for some of you, you're continuing to try to not only take care of yourself and your family, but you're also still having these groups. You're a peer support mentor. I know Kelsey asked me when I planned the presentation to say a few words to some of you. So the next couple of slides I'm going to go through pretty quickly because I know it's not all of you at the moment, but just remember that if you're still doing groups, even if you're doing virtual groups, that you want to structure some self-care strategies into meetings. You want to give time, and these questions, especially the next few coming up, are great discussion starters that you can put into meetings to help have self-care in a group setting. And then if you can share facilitation so that you can take turns and not always have to be the one in the leadership role, you can reflect and you can understand how people are responding. And when there is a crisis in the group, you know, make sure you practice the pause and take some time to reflect, and then debrief with folks. You know, what happened? What happened in our group, and what are our thoughts and beliefs about it? What are our feelings? What did we do? And then what helped? Really want to move your groups, if they're feeling stuck in a challenging place, to notice what helped. And so there's this great process called critical success analysis, and there's 2 slides here that are for you. They're in the materials that you can have that I just wanted you to have available so that if you're in that position as a group leader, you can use these to help support your group in moving forward even after times of group stress and group challenge. So I'm just leaving those there. You'll have them as a resource. But whether it's a group or whether you're doing this individually, you all want to navigate gently together to whatever the new normal is going to be. And you can definitely share this to the person who asked for that. And so as you're navigating, though, as you see this road that I've illustrated or picked here to illustrate, there's ups and downs, there's curves and bumps. And so there's going to be times when it feels overwhelming, and when you get into that overwhelming place, to just remind yourself to say, this is temporary. This is temporary. This is hard. I acknowledge how hard it is, but I know that we're going to keep moving, that this is a process, that we're not going to get stuck, that we're going to keep moving. And I see the question about silent anxiety creeping up on you. I hope that some of, in particular, when I get to the next few questions, that some of them will help in response to that. And if you don't feel like it did, then please feel free to come back and circle back to it. So as you're leading a group and dealing with your own self-care, here just to remind you to keep some balance. Balance the needs of the group with the individual needs, both of yourself or any individual member that you're supporting. Don't get sucked too far one way or another. Pause, reflect, ask someone to help you know if you are, in fact, having balance. Notice when it is okay, we are ready to keep moving versus when we do need to continue to pause and reflect. Sometimes there might need to be a change. You might need to change who's going to facilitate, who's going to lead for a while. And in your own life, have balance in how you use your body, mind, heart, spirit, emotions, and time to yourself, as well as time that you're engaging with others, all as part of your self-care plan. So let's come back to my list of questions. I gave you 3 that I call the breakfast time questions, and I gave you 3 that I called the lunchtime questions. And so this one stands alone. This is what I call the tea time question. I don't know if you take tea. I have experienced tea time in my day at different points in my life, but I've done a lot of work in Kenya, and the families and communities in Kenya that I've worked with have this lovely time when they take tea together. And even if they have virtually nothing, and even when they have a lot of stress in their own lives, they always pause for tea. And boy, do they grow good tea in Kenya. So I call this the tea time question, just to find one time during the day when you take that pause, whether it's for tea, whether it's for some other way, that you can just reflect on this question. What is one thing of beauty that I've seen, heard, or created today? So that question about when the silent anxiety creeps up on you, this is a really great one. Take that tea time pause. Ask yourself this question. Try to find that one bit of beauty that you can notice. And then when you do, share it. Share it with others. Share it with one other person that's with you. Share it with, on your social media. Share it with your group. Share it, and then ask others to share with you. Because it's in this sharing and noticing, first the noticing, the observing, the paying intentional attention to something of beauty, and then sharing it, that helps strengthen those brain pathways that lead to that resilience and that post-traumatic growth. Now, something else that might be helpful to you is having consistency and routines and making a schedule. I've seen lots of things posted about schedules, and if that works for you, if that's helpful to you, use it. But please be kind to yourself and others around scheduling. Please be flexible. Please don't feel rigidly attached to a schedule during times like this. Give yourself the grace and the space to be willing to take pauses and breaks from your schedule when needed. And as you do that, back to that question again about noticing something of beauty, engage and notice your sensory experiences. The right now, here and now moments of your sensory experiences. So again, that's an answer to the question that was raised earlier about what about that anxiety that sneaks up on you. Acknowledge it, give it voice, mention it, give it space and grace, and then acknowledge your current sensory experiences. Look around you and find something you can look at and say, that gives me a feeling of calm, just looking at that one bird that just flew outside my window, or whatever it might be. Listen to sounds. Really try to get in the moment of your sensory experiences. I'm getting a note from someone who's saying, I do this and I still find it creeps up on you. And I know these are not panaceas. These are not quick fixes. I hope they'll be helpful, and I hope as you consistently try to do them, that they will continue to help you. Notice something you can touch that's solid. Is the ground under me solid? Another thing that Brian Miller shared when I was listening to him earlier was when he said, the earth is strong enough to hold me. Just even noticing that. Notice your sensory experiences. And so then this brings us to dinner time. And I have 3 questions on the list that are for dinner time conversation. And so one thing I encourage is that you share your evening meal with somebody. If you are home alone, find a way to connect with somebody by phone, by text, by FaceTime, however it might work, that you can connect even for 5 minutes and say, here's what I'm eating, what are you eating? Let's share our meal together. And if you're with other people, then share that meal in person. But even if you're alone, try to find that way that you can connect over the breaking of bread. There's a strong and powerful healing that happens when we connect over the breaking of bread. And then when you do that, here's 3 questions, 8, 9, and 10 on my list, 3 dinner time questions that help part of our self-care, part of our reflectiveness for the day. What is one thing that I've learned today? What is one success I've had today? It could be a very small success. It could be a big one. Could be anything in between. It could be a success related. Oh, whoever's going to the Zoom dinner party, have a great time. What is one thing I've learned? What is one success? Ask these questions at your Zoom dinner party. Maybe your success is related to a goal that you set in the morning, and maybe it's something that snuck up on you and surprised you as a success. And what is one thing that surprised me or made me laugh today? Just like I started at the beginning with something that I hoped would make you smile or laugh. These are great questions for your own personal reflection and self-care, but also great to share with others. That's why I call them the dinner time conversation starters. However you do it, stay connected to your village. Stay connected in a way that where you have conversation and communication with folks, where you do things collaboratively together, whether you play a card game on FaceTime, or whether you and someone else agree to share a recipe, whatever it might be. Stay in community and show compassion, like the example of the grocery or the CVS worker that I mentioned about. Virtual baby shower, wonderful, another way to stay connected and in community. And then we come and we're nearing the end of our time together, and we're nearing the end of our day in terms of my daily list of reflection questions. You want to end each day well so you can start each day fresh. You want to sort of let those stresses in the upper left corner there kind of fade off into the distance, and then you want to end the day on those notes of gratitude that are in the bottom. So for that, I have shared the last 3 of the self-care questions are what I call the bedtime questions. And again, these are for yourself, for your own use as you do your own self-care, to reflect on these 3 things before you end your day, but also things you can share with others. And these are all, again, based in research that shows that when we do these things, it actually builds our resilience. It actually builds and rebuilds and nourishes those brain pathways that lead to resilience and post-traumatic growth and thriving. And so they're about letting go and reflecting on hope and gratitude, and here they are. What is one worry or fear I will let go of before I sleep? Sleep is one of those things we need for self-care. And yet, when we're filled with anxiety, when we're filled with worry, when we're dealing with this anticipatory or collective or ambiguous trauma and grief, there's a lot of worries we sometimes carry with us into bed, and it makes it hard to sleep. So consciously and intentionally think of a worry that you're going to let go of, and do something concrete to help you let go of it. Write it on a piece of paper and tear it up or burn it. Or if it's something you need to address and deal with tomorrow, write it down on a piece of paper and intentionally put it in another room, not the room you sleep in, and say, that will be there tomorrow. I'm going to let go of it for tonight so I can sleep, and I will deal with it tomorrow. And that act of doing something planful with that worry actually helps take it off your mind. It's not a perfect, but it does help. Then the next of the 3 bedtime questions is, what is one thing I'm thankful for today? I'm sure you've all seen there's just so much research about gratitude and how being intentional about expressing out loud gratitude really helps rebuild brain pathways and lead to resilience. And I know some people are starting to get off, so I want to make sure you get the last of these questions because it's my favorite one. What is one thing I'm looking forward to for tomorrow? one of the things we need most at times like this, and for our own self-care and for the healing collectively of our families and our communities, is hope. We need hope. We need optimism. We need to think there is at least one thing I can look forward to for tomorrow. And it might be just I'm looking forward to the smell of my morning coffee. Whatever it is, can I think of one thing that I'm looking forward to for tomorrow? And those three questions, when you take them together before you sleep and you turn off the news and everything else at least half an hour before that, it helps you sleep. It helps you have better self-care. It helps you be ready for tomorrow. So that's the end of my formal presentation. I have this wrap-up slide that gives you sort of the summary of the self-care tips that I shared. And I'll turn it back to Kelsey and Linda. We have, I guess, about 4 minutes for people if they do have some additional questions that I didn't get to respond to as they were coming along in the chat box.